The dollar is being debased. Its value is declining very, very quickly. When we borrow money today, we are literally borrowing officially at negative interest rates. If the US government owes $1 trillion to China, for example, and you have 10% inflation, that means that $100 billion of that debt just evaporates. Poof, magic. That's inflation-induced debt destruction. So this plan is something the government wants and the central banks want because it's a good deal for them. I think the cyclical markets, those markets are overpriced, and they are going to suffer greatly when there is a correction, just like they did the last time around.
I picked up today, so I'm gonna just pick up where you kind of left us there with inflation. So Wall Street Journal today, inflation anxiety. Just talking about gold. Well, I mean that's one indication of inflation. You have an interesting index that you've brought out in recent months. It's the Hartman Index. So
Yep.
So to give a little context to inflation, because some people. So, I mean, people today are feeling it right and left, on the consumer price basis, right? And you've got some. Do you have some of that in your presentation?
I do.
Why don't you pull that up if you want to share that, and then you can talk about it to the people that are listening to us today. But I thought it was interesting to give some context. So I'll let you take it from there.
Absolutely. So I developed an index called the Hartman Comparison Index, or the HCI for short. And the HCI is basically something that can help people understand if real estate is overpriced or underpriced or fairly priced. And before I go into that, just a few points on inflation. And for those of you watching on YouTube, you can see this. But if you're just listening in audio only, I'll try and elaborate and explain what is being shown visually. So, I think we all believe that the dollar is being debased and its value is declining very, very quickly. And for the first time in probably every single person's lifetime who's listening to this. Now, it's not the first time in history, but it's probably the first time in almost everybody who's listening's lifetime. We have a time when the stated rate of inflation via the Consumer Price Index is officially, now that's always a lie, and it's manipulated down, and it's they lie about the rate of inflation through hedonic indexing, weighting, and substitution. And we don't have time to go into that, but just know the index is artificially lower than it really is. But currently, David, the index is lower than or higher than interest rates on a 30-year mortgage. Now, that has probably not happened in anybody's lifetime who's listening to this right now. It did happen in the 40s for a short time. Okay, so maybe. I mean, for my mom, she experienced it, but didn't pay attention to it, I'm sure. And so when we borrow money today, we are literally borrowing officially at negative interest rates. Now, if they say the rate of inflation is 6%, for example, which is, it's like 6.1 was the last number, and you can borrow money for 3 decades at 3%, you're literally getting paid 3.1% to borrow. But I say the real rate of inflation is about 14 to 15% right now. So think about it. Bernie Madoff scammed so many people, and his big promise was that he could get people 8 to 12% consistently. All you need to do to get that right now is borrow money on a piece of real estate, and you could literally leave the house vacant and earn that rate of return because you're paying the money back in cheaper dollars. So this is how we short the dollar. My portfolio is long on almost everything, but I'm shorting the dollar big time through 30-year fixed rate mortgages. And that's one of the things we can do. It's one of the things I teach. I call it inflation-induced debt destruction. I know it's a mouthful.
That's good.
Inflation-induced debt destruction. And, Janet Yellen and Joe Biden are spending money like it is going out of style. And when the government spends, it creates inflationary pressure. And that inflationary pressure is now hitting the street. So think about it. What does the government do in this situation? They only have, I've identified 6 real choices of how this can play out. And it's already starting to play. They can default. They can literally say, hey, I know we made all these promises. I know we promised you Social Security and free healthcare and, socialist utopia. But sorry, we can't fulfill the promises because we ran out of money. Well, very politically unpopular, very unlikely. They could raise taxes. And, the Bernie Sanders of the world, he's like a juvenile. He doesn't understand how the world works. If you literally taxed everybody at 100%, you could not solve this problem. The GDP of the country is just over $20 trillion a year. That's the whole value of what the entire US economy produces. And the government takes in about $4 trillion a year. Okay. And so there is no way to solve this problem through taxes. Lawrence Kutlikoff, the economist who's been on my show several times, he's maybe done the most in-depth study of this. And in addition to the deficit and the debt, there's another component of this. And you probably know what I'm going to say. It's the unfunded mandates, right? Yeah. The unfunded entitlements. And these are the promises the government has made coming over the next 10 to 15 years. Well, Lawrence Kutlikoff says that's about $220 trillion. And guess what, David? That was before the pandemic.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
So post-pandemic, and by the way, I inserted that L intentionally. Okay. Gotta have a little
levity.
Perverse levity.
Yes.
Here. Yeah. So it's much higher now. So think about it. If we taxed everybody 100% and we got a $20 trillion economy, it would be 11 years of 100% taxes. In other words, slavery for the entire nation to pay just the promises the government have made if it stops making promises right now. It's impossible.
It's impossible. You're right.
The math doesn't work. Okay. We could have a yard sale. We could sell the ports to Dubai. Remember a few years ago, or about 10 years ago, they were talking about that. The Bureau of Land Management sells off land to real estate developers from time to time. We could sell military equipment to foreign countries. Maybe some of them we shouldn't be selling our technology to, but we're going to do it because we're broke. We could use the US military to steal assets of other countries. Hey, look, this is the history of the world. It's not pretty, but it is the history of the world. Most of the world map was drawn this way, and a fight over resources. We could have some great technology that saves us all, and this would be the good thing. But the most likely thing is they will simply inflate their way out of the problem. Because think about it. If the US government owes $1 trillion to China, for example, and you have 10% inflation, doesn't matter if that's in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, just 10% occurs, that means that $100 billion of that debt just evaporates, poof, magic. That's inflation-induced debt destruction. So this plan is something the government wants and the central banks want because it's a good deal for them. So, without going into the inflation thing too much, I think we probably all agree that that's happening. Let me just forward to the index a little bit because I want to discuss this issue of whether or not things are overpriced.
Yeah, it's always relative to what, right, Jason?
Yeah.
And that's what you're going to show here. Yeah. Good.
Absolutely. So we've got to ask what our measuring stick is when we measure the value of something. So many people, they know the price of everything and the value of nothing. Now, when I was a kid, I used to watch reruns of a show that you probably remember called Heart to Heart. You remember that show?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I liked that show because it was aspirational for me as a kid. And it started out saying, this is Jonathan Hart, or it was Max, the chauffeur. This is my boss, Jonathan Hart, right. And he's a self-made millionaire. Whoop-de-doo, right? A millionaire, that ain't nothing anymore.
Not today.
Yeah, you've got to be a decamillionaire, which means above 10 million, to be even close to equivalent of his lifestyle back then, right? So the value of the dollar keeps changing, and we keep measuring against the same thing. And when we look at real estate, we've got to understand: are we looking at linear, cyclical, or hybrid markets? They are very different. And right now, the stats I'll just share with you today are for the nation. But I just want to go into this linear versus hybrid thing for a moment, because the chart I'm showing on the screen now is for a linear market. We've been very active selling properties to clients in for many years. This is Memphis, Tennessee. It's an area largely populated by renters. It's a big logistics city. FedEx is a major employer there. And if you look at this chart, it is very linear. You see how this just chugs along the appreciation. It goes up, goes down a little bit sometimes, goes up some more, but it doesn't have any pronounced ups and downs. Now, this, on the other hand, is Miami. Now, I live in Palm Beach, just north of Miami, and you can see the chart here looks like a roller coaster, ups and downs. This is a linear market, Indianapolis. The chart looks very even, right? This is Los Angeles, where I grew up.
Oh, yeah.
And it looks like a roller coaster.
It does.
So
it does.
That's linear versus cyclical markets, and we like the linear markets much better.
Okay. It's interesting when you look at the linear markets, when you show that, and of course the correction or the downturn that people most remember in any age range is the most recent one, 2008 financial crisis, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you showed, which is typical in the linear markets, which is what I experienced, was there a dip in values, but not heavy, a little bit, which is okay, because when you're investing for cash flow, as long as the cash flow stays steady, which is what we look for, that dip in value doesn't matter. I mean, you're fine. You just ride that linear model. But anyway, back to your point. So I don't want to steal away from your great presentation, but where do you see our cycles going, or the market's going, in the next 10 years? I mean, it's a little bit of a guess, of course, but just from your standpoint, what do you think we're going to be? Linear, cyclical, or you mentioned obviously hybrid?
Well, I will give a little spoiler right now.
Okay.
I think the cyclical markets, like the West Coast of the US, the expensive Northeastern markets, and South Florida, where I'm not too far from there, those markets are overpriced. And they are going to suffer greatly when there is a correction, just like they did the last time around. However, the linear markets, which are most of the country, okay, they're what the criminal known as Hillary Clinton calls the flyover states. Okay, and that's most of the country. Most of the country is a linear market. So the markets we recommend to people in Florida, not the high-flying Florida markets, the sort of very linear, boring markets, Jacksonville, Ocala, around the country, Memphis, Indianapolis, Texas has gotten a little bit expensive, but some of those markets still work. And those markets are good. I think they're actually quite cheap. So when we look at the compared to what question, we answer, is it cheap or expensive? Well, here's the index. Here's the Hartman Comparison Index. And I'll just a couple samples from it. It compares a whole bunch of things, but gold. Gold has been considered money for thousands of years. And David, I'm not a gold bug. I don't think you are too, but I'm actually not sure. We've never discussed gold, have we?
No, we haven't.
Yeah. What do you think about it?
Well, I do have some gold, but I don't have an inordinate amount of it relative to my net worth or my investments. No.
Right. Yeah. I have a little bit too. I just call it insurance, just in case I need it. Okay. But if you look at real estate over the decades and you compare it to gold instead of the dollar, you really can find out some interesting things. Let's just go back. Let's go back maybe to 1990. Okay. Which I kind of have called 1990 the peak of civilization. Because I think in 1990s, when it all started going downhill, when all the really ugly music came out, and just a lot of 1990 was sort of the turning point, sadly, I think. And a lot of it has to do with music. But gold was $293 an ounce in 1990. Sorry, gold was $415 an ounce, and it took 293 ounces of gold to buy the median price house. Okay, so if you wanted to buy the median price house for $121,500 in 1990, you'd have to walk in with a suitcase with 293 ounces of gold. But today, you can buy the median price house, which everyone thinks is expensive, for $380,000, or gold, since it's $17.95 an ounce, as of September. Okay.
Yeah, give or take.
Give or take. You only need 212 ounces today. So priced in gold compared to 1990, which was what, 31 years ago, is housing cheap or expensive? Well, it's actually cheaper.
Yeah.
Yet most people think it's a lot more expensive because they don't compare it to enough things. And
Exactly.
gold is just one of many things.
If you enjoyed watching or learning from this video, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel for more content. If you have a question about any of my content or this specific video, just please leave a comment down below. And as always, stay focused on your freedom. I'll see you next time.